Okay, so now we're ready to start talking about loops in C#, and in this video I'm going to cover the for loop. The for loop is my favorite for beginners because everything you need is part of the essential syntax, and it's really hard to mess up a for loop, and that's why I always use that as my go-to, especially in C#1. But before we start, let's talk about what I call the essentials of counter-controlled repetition, which is what we're doing here, and you'll see. First, we need some kind of counter variable, and the value of this variable is what controls the loop and how many times the loop is going to go, and if the loop is going to keep going or if it's finally done. And there's also a loop condition, some relational expression which evaluates to true or false. So we'll see an example of that in just a moment. And then also, very importantly, an increment expression. So for example, we're going to write a for loop to fill the console. This is another console application with 5,000 yellow smiley faces. So what I've done, I've set the console color to yellow, get that out of the way. That doesn't have to be part of our loop. Only the code that is repeated needs to be as part of the loop. So here we have the for loop, and this is what I mean by all of those essentials. The 1, 2, 3 above are part of what we call the loop header. So this is the loop header. And then the part of the code that is repeated by the loop is called the loop body. Okay, we just have one line in the loop body. And just like with the if statement, if you only have one line of code that you're executing in the body, you don't need curly braces. You don't need them. Okay, it wouldn't hurt anything if you put them, however. Okay, so I'll just throw those down just so you can see that. You can do that as well. Okay, and you know, as with the if statement, I said this when we were talking about if statements, if you want to just always include the curly braces, that would not be a bad idea, especially if you're just beginning, because it's not a big deal if you include them and you don't really need them, but it would be a very big deal, very strange program behavior if you did need them and you forgot them. Okay, so anyway, getting back to the loop header here with our 3 essentials. So we talked about a counter variable, and so and a counter variable is like an integer. It's an integer. Imagine like a little guy behind the scenes counting on his fingers. Okay, that's like your loop counter. And so we have I called it counter. You can call it whatever you want, but for this first one I called it counter just so we know unequivocally that that is the counter variable. I start counting at 1. That's not typical, like especially when we start with arrays, probably next unit. It's more common to start your loop counting at 0 because arrays start at 0. But for our first one, I'd like to start counting at 1 just because it's more intuitive, because we as humans start counting at 1. So so that was the first essential. We have this counter variable. It starts at 1, and then we have the expression, or the loop condition, or the relational expression. We're going to keep going, keep looping while counter is less than or equal to 5,000. So this expression evaluates to true or false with every iteration of the loop, every rep of the loop. So first time through the loop, counter is equal to 1. Is 1 less than or equal to 5,000? Yes, it is. So we get a true. So when you get a true, the body executes. Okay? Which brings us to our third essential, the increment. Counter has got to change. So after that first smiley face, counter goes up to 2. This is the increment. This will add 1 to counter. So that's like C# syntax to add 1, increment by 1. Okay, and so then counter goes up to 2. Is 2 less than or equal to 5,000? Yes, it is. Still true. So we get another smiley face. The body executes once again. So eventually, counter is going to get up to 5,001 when this is all said and done. And finally, at that moment, this becomes false and the loop ends. So let's go ahead and run that. Okay, and there we have our 5,000 smiley faces.